good vibrations.
So it's an extremely important subject being discussed today because it's relevant to absolutely everything that goes on in human life every single day. So we can study the fine detail and the minutiae of all these agendas and all these psyops that are running and all these different systems of control that have been put into place. But sitting atop all of that is the ideology and the spiritual dynamics that have been put into place, and that feeds down into everything else. And so the key to comprehending why all these things are being done to us is to comprehend the true nature of those doing it and what drives them. And so my guest today is a guy who's researched all these topics intensely. I witnessed a fascinating presentation from him on Saturday last at the Veritas Mundi conference, which took place all day in Middlesbrough. And he's here today to expand on various aspects of that. So it's welcome to Good Vibrations to Steve James. Welcome, brother.
Whoa, thanks very much. Appreciate the warm invite and the kind words. Thank you.
Sure. Now, you're also known as Satanic Steve, and some people might get it a bit twisted and get the wrong idea about you from that name. So as far as I know, you're not someone that goes into the woods at 3 o'clock in the morning and sacrifices chickens around a fire, unless you've just not told me that about yourself. So do you maybe want to expand as to how you got that name?
Yeah, Satanic Steve wasn't a name that I came up with, but I kind of got, should I say, if a touch of irony here, but I kind of got christened with that name as a result of speaking out in a popular venue in the Northeast over the last couple of years. Where I speak almost exclusively about what I call the dark occult. It's been a bit of a fascination of mine for a number of years. And I think the dark occult is something that helps to explain reality and also explains certainly the reality that we're facing in our present time.
Sure. And would you like to say something about your background and your profession and what kind of led you to researching these subjects?
Yeah, it's probably a long, complicated, drawn-out question to answer as to how I got to the position, if you like, or my interest. But don't be alarmed by the name that I go by. I mean, to me, it's a bit of it is almost a touch of irony, an oxymoron being called Satanic Steve, because really I choose to use the dark side of nature to help embellish the light side. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I want to help people draw a pathway towards enlightenment, to understand that for every bad thing in life, well, there's an equal and opposite reaction, which is a good thing. But I don't go in the woods at night with chicken bones and pentagrams and stuff like that. There's definitely nothing satanic about my nature. Yeah. But having said that, and I think I might have mentioned on Saturday at the Veritas Mundi conference that I believe that there's probably about 66.6% of people in the world are practicing Satanists, but they don't even know it. I mean, I use that figure just as a touch, again, just as a laughable quip. But in reality, I think you could probably up that number to about 99.9% of the planet are probably practicing Satanists and don't even realize it.
Yeah, just invert that 666 to a 999.
Exactly. Invert it just like Satan wants.
That's right.
What got me into occult themes, I suppose? I mean, I've always had a vested interest into kind of paranormal things. I remember reading Chariots of the God as a kid, and I think, you know, it was probably one of the first books with big writing I probably picked up. But I've always had a long interest in paranormal and mysteries, but the occult things came at a much later date, because when I got interested in occult themes, I realized that there was a whole new universe just hidden behind the topic, which we don't encounter at all in our everyday to-day lives.
Would you describe yourself as religious?
No, Far from it. However, I do study religion because I think a lot of the teachings in religion are very, very important. I think, some of the religious books, for example, the Bible, I think is one of the most esoteric books ever written. And that is the same to be true from lots of other religious scriptures. And I think we still need to, religious or not, I think we still need to learn the metaphors, the parables, the parallels in life that we can pick up from these scriptures and relate it to our own existence, our own timeline, and use it as a model to base ourselves on. But religion is, as far as I'm concerned, some may take real great offense at this, and I don't intend to, but religion is another power grab and control mechanism. The very word itself is about control.
Yeah, just break down the etymology of the word there.
Yeah, religion, in its Latin sense comes from the word relegare, which means to thwart from progress, to hold back. And to hold back, to thwart the progress of a spiritual disposition or the fuller extent of understanding that spiritual disposition, I think is what is meant by the word religion.
Sure, says it all. And we learn so much from just studying the language that's right there in plain sight that we've used all our lives. It's often misconstrued. So it's often remarked that we live in a satanic society, and that's a phrase that will trigger many, as you've alluded to there. For some, it will sound too outrageous and fantastic to be true, and they'll claim that there's no indication or proof that this could be the case at all. And for others, it will trigger religious sensibilities and ideas of Satan or the devil. So we should probably start off with your take on what Satanism actually is and what that word, that name actually means.
Yeah, it's a real complicated one, but and the whole notion of this battle of good versus evil is a really, really complicated one, which is why, in a sense, enlightenment is the key to unlocking how these mysteries tie in, because we need to establish a higher order of mind. And I'm not saying this as some sort of know-it-all, bloke who's got more mystical knowledge than anybody else, because I haven't. I'm a very humble bloke from a very humble background. My background is I've been a soldier pretty much all my life. Most of my working life, I've been a soldier. I'm not exactly blessed with the brains of Britain, but enlightenment and understanding things of a spiritual nature is what helps us fathom out the mysteries to life, I think. But in terms of what is Satanism, well, we live a satanic life. Like I say, I think the majority of people in the world are Satanists without even knowing it, because we follow the doctrine and the you could say the tenets of what Satan desires from us in life. In order to transcend that, we need to understand what our enemy wants from us. And this is where a lot of teachings from religious scripture can help, because if we want to explore our life, the nature of reality in more depth, we can't just do it with an everyday 9-to-5 easygoing attitude. We need to explore the concept of how the mind works and how consciousness works, how the universe works in more depth. It takes an awful detailed, thorough approach to figuring that out. So we need to really be on top of our philosophical process or progress in order to gauge that. It's probably a very complicated thing to describe, but if we can apply a philosophical mindset into exploring some of the dynamics of good versus evil, then we are in a much better position to do so.
So the word Satan comes from a Hebrew word, which is also very similar in Arabic, right?
Yeah, in Arabic, I believe it's Hai Shaitan. Essentially, it's just, in pretty much most definitions of or translation, it means the opposer, the opposite. And I can only assume that opposite is the opposite of God or godliness or good. I think etymology is massively important, should never be underestimated anyway, because pretty much everything that comes out of our mouth has the power and potential behind it. You know, just like many people in occult who understand the occult will talk about words are spelled, just like a magic trick is spelled. It's a magic spell because we spell the words. The words carry a vibration. That vibration can affect reality in some way or somehow. So, Satan is the opposer.
And the word abracadabra, as attributed to magicians, actually means, when you break it down, as I speak, I create. So it's telling you right there that our words do affect physical manifestation. And so we do have to be careful how we use them.
Massively, yeah. It's a real good example. And I think, we need to choose our words wisely. We also need to know that the words can be used against us in order to change the way that our minds think and react. So, we have to be on guard for things that we're listening to, I presume.
Yeah. And if satanic inversion involves taking what's true and twisting and distorting it, then that would apply to the very definition and understanding of what Satanism really is, just as much as anything else. So it seems it's been misrepresented in terms of how most people would interpret that phrase, just like other words like anarchist, the occult itself, and apocalypse, just to give some examples. So, anarchist, when you mention that word, a lot of people's minds will go to unruly chaos and disorder. And you mention the occult, most people's minds will go to something that's bad or evil. And then apocalypse, people will think of some sort of disaster or calamity. And with those three examples, the actual truth of what those words represent is very different.
Yeah, they're real good examples to kind of explain just how easily we can be coerced or manipulated under like mind control, a spell of mind control, just through the use of words. I mean, as an example, you mentioned the word apocalypse, and that already, to almost everyone will bring thoughts of destruction and the end of the world, when the very word itself, well, you could say we are in the apocalypse now, because the word means a revealing. And we are being, information is being revealed to us on a daily basis. With thanks to things like the internet and social media, a lot of things are now being brought to light. Some of the things that were done in darkness are being brought to light as a result of the apocalypse, the revealing. So the revealing, the apocalypse, could essentially be a good thing for humanity. And I mean, I equate the times we're going through at the moment, since the COVID pandemic occurred, I think this was the start of the apocalypse, the revealing. Yeah, and you mentioned other words like the occult, and that to a lot of people brings connotations of darkness and satanic stuff and black magic rituals, when the very word itself just means hidden or secret knowledge. What that knowledge might be or might be used for, of course, can be for intents of both good and bad. And of course, it's not always bad things it can be used for. But the nature of the society we live in dictates really how this information is used. What was the third word you used there, Mark?
It was anarchist or anarchy.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's my favorite. That's my favorite political thought at the moment, anarchy, because anarchy, everyone thinks it's chaos, trouble, violence, out of control. No, far from it. True anarchy just means without rulers. And, really, if we were a civilized society, educated and, we're capable of allegedly putting man on the moon, but we can't live without the notion of a bunch of government officials dictating how we live our lives. No, anarchy to me is the solution to a lot of the world's problems, because without rulers, then we're not living under the guise and under the thumb of dark occultists who have got intent to create destruction upon us.
And you mentioned enlightenment just there, and that's another revealing word, because that can apply to making something or someone light as in the opposite of dark, or as in the opposite of heavy, making them light. But both connotations there are good and positive and godly. And so many religious and spiritual texts talk of enlightenment as being the key to making sense of what these human lives are all about. It's all about regaining that connectedness to divine source. And so you have to become enlightened in terms of losing the darkness and embracing the light, but also becoming light in terms of not being weighed down through density into base consciousness and this apparent 3D reality. So there's a double meaning there, but it's an important word.
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think this is what a lot of religious scripture tries to kind of bury between the metaphors of the various gospels and the various written words that they use. I mean, personally, I quite like to refer to Santos Bonacci's work. I think he's got podcasts or videos explaining about Christ consciousness, the Christ within, the 33 steps on the stairway to heaven, or the Jacob's ladder, which somehow relates to the 33 vertebrae in the human spine. And I can't do justice to his great work on this line of things, but I find that very, very worthwhile reading or looking into for anybody who's got a religious sentiment and wants to know more about the religious metaphors hidden in the Bible, for example. That was one great piece of work I'd certainly refer to people to. And of course, occultists, whether good or dark, will understand the relevance of the number 33. And we see this in so many places. Walking down the local high street, for example, we'll see this number put in front of us so many times that we don't even realize it's there. But in other sentiments as well. I mean, to me, it's one of the numbers of creation which are kind of embedded into the matrix of reality. I think it helps us to understand that there is something divine into reality when we see some of these numbers, which I would call the building blocks of creation, that embed themselves into various things, whether it's dates, whether it's meanings or logos from various companies and institutions. Everybody knows the number 33 is synonymous with Freemasonry, but we see this number kind of embellished into the, let's just say, the COVID situation. I mean, the World Health Organization declared COVID a global pandemic on the 11th of March 2020, which 11th of March is 11 and 3, March being the third month. 11 times 3 is 33. We know Jesus died at the age of 33, according to religious scripture. 33 bones in the human spine. We see the number 33 encoded into other things that we probably take for granted, encoded into something like Remembrance Day, 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month, which together added up equal that number 33. A couple of the examples I used in my presentation recently with Veritas Monday is Kennedy was killed on which day? The 22nd of November, the 11th month. 22nd day, of course, add them together, we'll get 33. And, I think the JFK assassination is very well known for its Masonic influences behind the scenes there.
It was a Masonic ritual known as the killing of the king. It was like a sun worship ritual, which was played out right there in front of the general public of the world in plain sight.
Oh, massively. I mean, to me, I would almost say the Masonic motifs embedded in the JFK murder ritual were deep and profound. It's so many trinities, so many triples, the triple underpass, the Trinity River, the 33rd parallel state. The three Masonic assassins, the pageantry of the Masonic assassins. It's almost like the world is a stage, and that was the pageantry of Freemasonry brought about into a stage show known as real life. You could almost use that same sort of thought and understanding into the what you could class as the martyrdom of George Floyd as well.
Yeah, the taking of the knee, another Masonic ritual.
Exactly.
That was connected to the murder of Hiram Abiff, this legendary mythical character within Freemasonic doctrine. And there were said to be 3 assassins involved in that. And the 3 tramps that you mentioned involved in the Kennedy assassination appear to be a representation of those 3 characters. And that even ties into Jack the Ripper. The Jack the Ripper murders were Masonic in nature. That was the acting out of rituals there. And there was a scrawling famously on one of the walls at the time that said something like, the Jews are the ones that shall not be blamed, but it was spelled Juwes. And I think that ties into the names of the 3 assassins involved in the Hiram Abiff murder, according to that story, who all had names beginning with J and sort of very similar to that.
Yeah, it is almost as if life imitates art. And if we explore the philosophies and the mindset and the deeper connections or the occult connections, you could say, into Freemasonry, for example, we can understand how there is a very, very significant flavor of occult or Freemasonry, or you could almost say magic penetrating into the void known as reality. When we see the embellishment of how these things tie in to the average person, of course, this just sounds like conspiracy theory, and they walk away quite satisfied that it's just stuff and nonsense, nothing to see here. They'll walk away from it. But the deeper you look into things, well, I'm afraid this flavor does not remove itself, because it's here to stay, and it kind of formulates something magical about real life, which isn't quite as real as we think it is when we do look deeply into it. Like I say, life imitates art. JFK, George Floyd, the Jack the Ripper killings. There's some very, very weird instances of life imitating art there.
Yeah. And as I recall, one of the Jack the Ripper murders took place on 9/11, September 11th of 1888. So 9/11/88. It's all in the numbers. And you mentioned 33 there, the significance of the number 33, which we do see everywhere.
Yeah.
We see it in so many newspaper so-called reports where they'll say, oh, there's 33 new cases of COVID this week, or 33 people died in this terrorist attack, or whatever. It's always 33. There's always that signaling going on there. And thinking about 33, my mind went back to a news item of quite a few years ago now. You might recall there was a story of some miners who were trapped down deep underground in a mine in Chile. And there was this dramatic rescue operation where they sent down this capsule down the shaft, and they brought these 33 miners back up to the surface. And there's so much symbolism going on there, because it seems to symbolize this idea of the raising of the chrism oil, which Santos Benacci gets into, and that's connected to the raising of kundalini energy up the spinal column, the 33 vertebrae. So they seem to have been acting out that spiritual process, alchemical process, right there in that event, and telling the world about it, but knowing that most people would have no idea of what's being symbolically communicated there. It's another ritual.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, again, life imitating art. The art form of the Masonic pageantry, rising from the bottom of the darkness, rising up. Here's the 33, that sacred number again, rising up so they can reach the light. Yeah, love it. It's again, sometimes I find it hard to determine which is real and which is the matrix. because it seems to be intertwined. 33 is one such number, which, I mean, I don't know what it'd be like now with the massive censorship on the internet and social media, but certainly at the start of the COVID pandemic, the amount of 33s coming up in the various figures for, the headline news, 33 deaths, 33 cases, 33%. It was absolutely outrageous. But that same number, in fact, it got so common, I actually got bored with the research. And it takes me a lot to get bored with researching the nature of reality. But 33 used to come up massively on various news headlines, news articles. But one other number that used to come up was number 322.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not yet an everyday common or garden number that you'd associate with. There's 322,000 deaths from COVID. There's 322% rise in COVID cases, etc., etc. £322,000 this has cost. That number was absolutely prolific throughout the, on various news articles from across the world, I might add, that it just got to be quite repetitive looking at it. But I did incorporate quite a few examples of that number in one of my presentations regarding how life imitates art regarding the COVID situation. Let's call it the COVID apocalypse, the COVID revealing, because I think this is just a revealing to help us step as a human species from an age of darkness into an age of enlightenment.
And you can call it convid if you want. I do.
Yeah, convid. Well, it takes something like convid to help scratch the surface of the veneer or the outer casing of those entrenched minds that need to be woken up with something significant. And I think COVID, convid, the pandemic, I think that is the great revealing to help us, the apocalypse, to help us enter into a great awakening.
So 322 is a date, and it's a very significant date. Just talk a bit about why it's so important, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I say, at the start of convid, this date used to come up quite a lot. I mean, not just quite a lot, like ridiculous amounts. And again, I'd encourage anybody to check social media, check the internet, just for a little bit of clarification to see how many times this number came up, because to me it was just in your face all the time. But anyway, the date does correspond, or the number rather, 322 does correspond to a date in the calendar, which of course is March the 22nd, the third month. And anybody who's even done probably a mediocre research into occult themes will probably recognize that number. It's a number associated with the Lodge of the Skull and Bones Society, which is a secret society based out of Yale University, which has had some fairly prominent members in American society. We're talking about 3 American presidents have been members of Yale University Skull and Bones Lodge 322. But the date as well, the date is known in Satanic terms as the Satanic season of sacrifice. And it's a very, very important date in their calendar. It ties into the vernal equinox, which is generally around about the 19th of March. And, when the sun raises its head after, the death on the solstice, the vernal equinox, it's a time of Lucifer rising, you could say. Lucifer rising on 322. And again, anybody can verify this, have a look on the internet, go on Wikipedia, for example, and just have a look at the death toll associated with that date. Of course, it is a period in time. It starts the 22nd of March and it ends on the 1st of May. It's a 40-day period. It's known as the season of sacrifice. But if you just take the first date alone, and see the significant events that have happened in world history on that day, it is very, very revealing, a big eye-opener. And of course, one of the most significant things for me in recent times occurring on that date was just so happened to coincide with the date they announced the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, not just in the UK, but I believe it was Greece, India, New Zealand, perhaps other countries as well. Bit of a satanic coincidence, that, is it not, Mark?
Well, it is. Everything's done by the dates. And in my talk on Saturday, I drew attention to the fact that Johnson announced on the 31st of October, which is another important date. It is, of course, Halloween, but it's also one of these midpoints that you get between the solstices and the equinoxes. There are 4 of these during the year, and one of them occurs sort of 31st of October, 1st of November. So that date was chosen for Johnson to announce a new lockdown coming in the UK. But rather than it being imposed immediately, he said that it's going to come into play from this Thursday, which just happened to be the 5th of November, another important date. So if it had been that vital to lock everything down because the virus was rampaging out of control, why wait 5 days? Why not do it immediately? Well, because everything's being done symbolically and by the numbers.
Yeah, massively so. Totally agreed. That's both lockdowns occurring on Satanic holidays. Come on, is that all coincidence? And I mean, the coincidences just keep racking up. But largely it's because, like I said at the start, people have a satanic mindset. The satanic mindset, where, I was basically saying the majority of the world are Satanists, not because they go in the woods, with chicken bones and standing in a pentagram. It's because they're quite happy to pay a blind eye to the truth. And they
would be horrified, absolutely mortified at the suggestion that they're Satanists.
Yeah, exactly right. And, most people, and I would even agree that the majority of people in this world are kind, considerate, loving people. So why would they think for a second that they were Satanists? Simply because they don't understand the satanic mindset, and they don't understand that in order to pay a blind eye to the truth, well, you've got to be quite ignorant to do that. And most people don't want to associate themselves with being ignorant, of course, because that's a negative trait. Nobody wants to think of themselves as being negative or having traits that aren't, high in value. And this is why there's this great sort of clash of paradigms, so to speak. But going back to that number 322, if we use that just as and I'm talking to innocent people in the world who allow this information to go blindly by without understanding it whatsoever. Do a rudimentary search on the internet, go on Wikipedia, see what happened on March the 22nd in history, and we've got a long list of disasters, terror campaigns, killings, murders. I'm not saying things don't happen on other dates, but let's take as a small example, let's go into war. So in 2003, the Iraq shock and awe campaign kick-started. Thousands of people died. That was March the 22nd, 2003. The same day in 2011 was the US invasion of Libya. 15,000 people at least died as a result of that campaign. We've got things closer to home. Brussels, for example, March the 22nd, 2016, 35 people killed in a terror attack. But what about the Westminster Bridge terror attack in London? 4 people killed in that, March the 22nd. Or the shooting spree in Colorado, 10 people. That was in 2021. Things happen, bad things happen on all sorts of dates. But when you see big, glaring lists of things, that must prick your conscience. And if not, maybe you might want to start thinking there's a touch of ignorance going on there. Other little things happen on that day, Mark, if I can elaborate. I mean, I mentioned, again, this was going back to the little conference that we were in on Saturday, this Monday. There's other little humorous, you could almost say humorous things crop up from time to time. And I was saying during my presentation that Satan, whether it's a force, whether it's a dude, whatever it is, Satan loves a bit of humor. And, March the 22nd in 1957 was when Elvis Presley released a song called All Shook Up. And on the very same day, an earthquake shook up San Francisco. NASA, of course, like to use satanic dates for a lot of their launches and a lot of their announcements. I mean, one such thing was, I forget the year, it might have been 2020, it was when they launched a helicopter drone on the planet Mars, better known as Devon Island. But NASA, of course, used the date known as the 19th of April, the Feast of Moloch. That was the date they announced the helicopter drone flew on Mars, and it flew at a height of 3 meters for 30 seconds. And they launched it at 3:30 in the morning just to get the extra 33 in there.
Of course they
But
did.
of course, NASA love humor. Satan loves humor. And speaking of NASA, I think we can easily summarize NASA in a very small sentence. What do they launch a rocket? What do they say before they launch a rocket? They say T minus. And if you minus the T out of the word Satan, what do you get? We'll get the word NASA.
Another thing about 322, 22nd of March, is that was the release date for the Beatles, with the Beatles, their debut album.
Awesome.
And
I never knew that.
Yeah, well, there's another one for the list. And another thing about that date, 22nd of March, which is very topical, actually, to the time that we're recording this, is that was the date in 1980 where the Georgia Guidestones were first unveiled, credited to an individual known as R.C. Christian. And as we record this, we're just a few days away from their destruction. So some sort of explosion or strike destroyed half the stones, and the rest of them were craned away very quickly afterwards. So there's different ways of interpreting what this means. Some people feel this is a win for us, in inverted commas, and that somebody's taken these things down in an act of rebellion. But others feel that the so-called elites have no further need to publicly proclaim their wish list, what they want to achieve, because as far as they're concerned, the job is done and the agenda is already well underway. I mean, the most sinister inscription on those stones was the wish to reduce the human population to 500 million, they say, in perpetual balance with nature. Could this mean that they feel they're on the way to achieving that through various slow kill methods that they put in place? I mean, what's your interpretation of how to symbolically decode the destruction of those stones?
Yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged one, isn't it? I mean, when I learned that the stones were destroyed, I was thrilled a bit, and I probably let off a bit of a round of applause or a cheer or something. But then, instantly you think, well, what date did it happen? And that's, I mean, I never watch the news now, and unless it's a significant satanic holy date, and I'll see what's going on. But that was my first thought. What's the date? Then I saw some video footage, which was quite interesting because the time apparently of the attack, of the incident, was 3:33 a.m., which, I don't think that was necessarily just a coincidence.
Is there any other time that it could have happened?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Well, but possibly 3:22 a.m. That would have been good.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. 3:22 would have been another good one. But, look at the date. Just like you said, they were brought into fruition on 3:22, 40 years ago. These things aren't done by chance. And this is why you could almost say there's, whether it's by default or design, there is a purposeful intent into the building blocks of creation, which we can interpret through these numbers and through these dates. I don't think I've got the answers to them, but there's definitely something embellishing the nature of reality a little bit outside of the scope of our understanding. And I think this is why understanding the occult is so important, because it almost opens up a third eye to noticing this detail. And I quite often say on some of my presentations that the devil is in the detail. And if we look into the detail, we can see, hey, the devil, or we can certainly see elements of creation involved into this real life. I mean, I call real life, you might have heard me on Saturday, I call real life as clown world, because it's almost like a big top that we're in, and some of the stuff that goes on, even though there's obviously sad things that go on as well, but it's almost comical when you see the pageantry written into this, almost the production of it.
I just don't remember being asked if I'd like to take part in this clown show, but evidently I must have been, because here we are. Another thing about the Georgia Guidestones is the date of their destruction was the 6th of July, which is 6/7 or 7/6 in the American version of the date. And it's been pointed out that this just happens to be the 76th birthday of George W. Bush, village idiot Bush, the younger. And George Bush Jr. and Sr. were both members of Skull and Bones at Yale University, the number for which is 322. So you've got 322 connected to the construction or the unveiling of the Georgia Guidestones, and then their destruction happens on a date which encodes village idiot Bush. So the devil is certainly in the detail there. It's
outrageous, isn't it? I mean, it's and this is the thing. I think it's almost an enormity. It's a volume. It's almost like a lifetime's worth of coincidences, synchromisticism, whatever you want to call it. You can't deny that there's something wacky about what goes on in clown world. The Georgia Guidestones are a great one to kind of, to cross-examine.
I mean, there's another connection, George Bush and the Georgia Guidestones. I hadn't spotted that one.
You're right, yeah. The fact that George Bush is somehow connected in there, it's got to kind of raise questions. I mean, it's a bit like 9/11. You mentioned the date, September the 11th, of course, which again is one of Satan's favorite dates ever. A day that marks tearful tragedy, but also a date where George Bush himself was reading a book called My Pet Goat Upside Down. Satan loves inversion. Satan loves goats. And that's kind of, what's that all about? Another thing that happened, you mentioned the Beatles released an album on 322. Well, one of the best albums for me as a rock music fan was released on March the 22nd as well. I forget what year, it might have been 1982, but it just so happens to be a record by Iron Maiden. And that album happened to be called The Mark of the Beast. The Mark of the Beast, number 666, came into fruition on March the 22nd. I mean, how ironic is that?
Yeah. I think that was 82. And the number 666 is everywhere. You see it in convid patents, patents for vaccines, patents for digital ID ideas coming out of Bill Gates's foundation, of course, where else? Also, we get it in the measurements that are encoded into the globe Earth teachings or heliocentrism. 66,600 miles per hour. I think there are 3 or 4 different encodings of the number 666 into the official narrative measurements of, the movement of the Earth, so-called, supposedly. And then you get endless celebrities and politicians and even people like the Pope and religious leaders flashing up the old 666 hand sign in public whenever there's a camera present. So that number is literally everywhere, isn't it?
It's absolutely outrageously embedded everywhere, which is why, it's said that Satan, and I'm going by religious scripture here, the Bible states that essentially Satan is the god of this world. I don't think he's the ultimate, you know, man in charge, but Satan is the god of this world. If that was the case, did he have a say into the design? Because, you know, if we use the number 666, for example, which is clearly the mark of the beast, the number he favors most of all, well, what's the tilt of the earth? 23.4 degrees from the 90 degree inclination. That leaves a remainder of 66.6 degrees. I often, you know, in one of my presentations, I mentioned the number 666, needless to say, but I say we've been looking for answers to what this all means ever since the dinosaurs became extinct. And you could say it was between 65 and 67 million years ago. Some schools of thought say it was 66.6 million years ago. I also say that if you look everywhere for answers, in fact, if you were just to look on the real estate owned by Her Majesty the Queen, which is 6.66 billion acres of land, then you might find some evidence. Of course, you mentioned, you know, that this various numbers written into the physical properties of the earth. You know, I've mentioned the tilt of the earth. You probably mentioned as well the speed that the earth orbits the sun, which is 66,600 miles per hour.
Well,
Gravity.
allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly.
Allegedly it orbits.
Yeah, exactly. Gravity, whatever that is, that was invented in 1666 when an apple fell on somebody's head who happened to be a Freemason. You know, and if that's not weird enough, what is the force of gravity on Earth? Well, it's 666 newtons.
Of course it is.
Even the curvature, if there was a so-called curvature to what they call the oblate spheroid, well, the curvature of the Earth is supposedly 0.666 feet per square mile.
What else could it be?
The speed of sound, even 666 knots per second. You know what? It's almost laughable, especially when you realize that most of these figures come from an organization known as NASA, which is a very close anagram of the word Satan. Like I said, just minus the T and you've got NASA. But then they've got a budget of $18 billion a year, and 18 is essentially 3 sixes.
NASA founded by and run by Freemasons, but nothing to worry about, just a coincidence.
Yeah, very interesting history they've got. And I think you touched upon that on Saturday, mentioning people like Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley.
I think John Hamer mentioned that, but some of the founder members of NASA were Jack Parsons of Jet Propulsion Laboratories, who was a close affiliate of L. Ron Hubbard, who started Scientology, Dianetics, and they were both students of Aleister Crowley and the dark occult teachings that he espoused. So what could possibly go wrong? So do you see Satan as an entity rather than an overriding mindset?
No, and I'll be quite honest, I don't have the answers to what it is. I can only give my kind of assumptions based on what I've kind of been led to understand, in a sense. And like I say, I think we'll have to develop a philosophical mindset to kind of get to appreciate what, who, or why this is. But you know, and take a lot of things into account to come to that kind of understanding. But for me, Satan isn't, it certainly isn't a creature with horns and a long, you know, pointy tail. I actually think, in fact, there's two kind of schools of thought I go down. One might come across as a little bit strange because it's based on a vision I had. And again, I may as well mention this because, you know, I told a few people during my presentation on Saturday that I had a vision in October 2019 where I was doing an awful lot of meditation that year. You know, I'm talking about 2 to 3 hours a night sometimes. So a real lot of meditation going on. No hallucinogenic substances involved, for those who are wondering. Absolutely none of that. It was just plain old simple meditation. But I was contemplating the nature of reality. I was also, one of my interests is alchemy. So, you know, I had a lot of kind of deep philosophical things to contemplate. But what came to me was, and again, this is going to be very controversial, and I'm going to really summarize it here, otherwise it'll be a very long-winded conversation. But the part of the vision I had kind of, you could almost say, explained to me that both God and Satan, and I kind of use the term God and Satan are the same dude. It's equal and opposite sides of a force, a creation and a destructive force. Again, I'm just explaining a vision I had. I'm not saying this is what it is. I've got the answers here. I could be a million miles off the mark. And some people will probably take offense at that. You know, nobody wants to think that God is going to be associated with something dark. But if I was to also mention that part of this vision showed me the nature of how the world was going to transpire in the near future, you know, it might give it some sort of extra sort of credence, I suppose, because what I was shown, what I saw through this vision was that the world was going to enter a very, very dark cave. And we were going to be held at the back of the dark cave until we as a species realized that there was a glimmer of light. The glimmer of light almost at the end of the tunnel. At the entrance of the cave was a faint glimmer of light, but we had to cooperatively, as a species, cooperate in order to get to that glimmer of light. And when we emerged from out of the cave, we would then be immersed in the glorious light of creation, and we would find ourselves in a much happier place. That's it in a nutshell, but I also saw other things that turned out to have some sort of semblance of truth, or certainly occurrences which did actually happen. And of course, anyone can say they had a vision prior to an event and claim it was accurate, but to kind of add some clarity onto this, I did actually tell a number of people about this vision, most of whom thought I was quite mad, by the way. This was in November 2019. I told a large amount of people in my family, and I spread this out. This was quite a long, in-depth conversation I had, several hours long, where I was basically explaining what was going to happen and what I'd seen. And one of those things was, of course, I saw warfare happening. I saw civil uprising and civil unrest happening. But I also saw that you could almost say the politics that we understand from our from the nature of the world today is going to be quite different in the future. That's going to come, as far as I'm concerned, to a big collapse. And again, that's just from the vision I had. So whether that's got some accuracy, who knows?
Well, I guess we'll know soon enough.
Yeah.
What is the difference between Satan and Lucifer, and Satanism and Luciferianism? Because Christians lump both these entities in together as pseudonyms for the devil, and they throw Beelzebub into the mix as well. And these are all names for the devil within sort of religious belief systems. But Satanism and Luciferianism are quite different, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, again, I kind of go back to, I could almost say, even though this vision, you can't always go by what you see in a dream to be correct, but it kind of does to an extent. It had such a profound impact on me that it has kind of found its way into a little bit of my worldview, where I understand creation and destruction just being opposite ends of the same force, so to speak. But you could almost say that mankind is, even though it's hard to understand and appreciate, we are adopting a Luciferian mindset. We are adopting a satanic mindset. Our sort of philosophical, the paradigm of our worldview is almost satanic in its approach, because I mean, I like to go by the works and understanding of a man called Mark Passio, who I know you're kind of associated with through the One Great Work Network. But he talks about the tenets of Satanism, and how you'll talk about moral relativism and social Darwinism, eugenics, And of course, selfishness, rampant selfishness is one of the leading tenets of Satanism. And you don't have to be a philosophist to realize that, in the aggregate, the society that in the modern world has got quite a selfish attitude to its the nature of its understanding. We could even say the New Age movement is Luciferian in its kind of understanding, because hidden beneath the surface of things like the divine feminine, and look how important I am, and it's all about proliferating on myself as an individual. Well, that's almost like a Luciferian mindset, which is going to be hard for a lot of people to take into account, because of course nobody wants to associate themselves with something that's negative in that respect, especially spiritual people. To say spiritual people are maybe a little bit misguided at times. Nobody really wants to hear that. But of course, this is where we need to think a little bit deeper. This is where we need to really search for the understanding of enlightenment, because we are following almost a selfish attitude. I mean, I would summarize it by saying, well, what does Satan want? If Satan was a dude, well, do you know what? It doesn't really matter what Satan is. But what does Satan want? Satan wants service to self. What does he not want? Satan doesn't want service to others. How do we live our lives? Do we serve ourselves, or do we serve it for the benefit of others? Do we serve it collectively? That's maybe the mindset that we need in all circumstances to bear in mind, whether you're religious or not, whether you're spiritual or not. What are we doing to help other people in our current environment? And are we doing that above serving our own interests?
So many people would ask, if Satanists are covertly controlling every aspect of our lives, why the hell would they want to broadcast this fact by placing their calling cards everywhere? Why would they want celebrities and politicians flashing up these 666 hand signs and the Baphomet horned hand and the pyramid signs and all this? Why would they want to encode 33 and 666 into everything? Why wouldn't they want to fly completely below the radar without flagging themselves up in any way? I mean, I've got clear views on this, but I'll bat it over to you to get your viewpoint as to why they do this.
Yeah, Mark, well, I'd imagine we might have a similar understanding, but in a lot of certainly dark magic ritual, satanic rituals and what have you, the victim usually has to be in agreement as to what's going to be performed. So the victim somehow has to be told, even if it's in a roundabout fashion, as to what he is about to receive, because it might be something to negate the karmatic debt, the consequences of doing something cruel or inhuman to somebody. You might have to negate that by, well, I asked him permission. Yes, I've done it in a deceiver. I've done it with an element of deception there, but I've done it. Just like really we as humanity are receiving the mark of the beast. The patent number of the COVID vaccine ends with 666, but we're receiving that not with full permission, but we're doing it because we've been deceived, if you like. There's been a message to deceive us or trick us into receiving that. But that's one of the reasons why I believe that people or celebrities, governments, whatever, are actually telling us what's happening. They're telling us in a roundabout fashion to eliminate the karmatic debt of the consequences of their behaviors and actions. It's almost synonymous with anything in satanic ritual where permission has to be given by the victim. What your thoughts are on that?
Well, it's my comprehension that that's why they do it, because they believe they're alleviating themselves of karmic burden by putting the emphasis on us. So they take our tacit approval, us not saying no, as good as saying yes. But I always make the point that this is a deeply flawed way of understanding that dynamic on their part, because they don't come right out and openly explain what they're doing. So thinking about predictive programming, for instance, every major world event has had aspects of it encoded into movies and TV shows and such ahead of the event. And they feel that by putting these little cryptic clues into these vehicles, they're telling us what they're up to, but they don't come right out and say it. So they haven't actually said on the 9th of, on September 11th of 2001, we plan to destroy the World Trade Center towers in New York, blame it on 19 Arab hijackers armed with box cutters, and say that they flew planes into the buildings, and then the aviation fuel melted the steel frames and the buildings collapsed. They don't come right out and say it in those terms. So the fact that they feel the need to conceal it in TV shows and movies and stuff means that they know they shouldn't be doing it. And they have to find these sneaky, snitchy little ways of doing it. They think they can cheat their way out of karma. So they can't actually make the claim that we said we were okay with it, because we weren't given the opportunity to fully comprehend the actual detail of what they propose to do. So I would say it's a very flawed way of looking at things, and they haven't got themselves off the hook karmically, and they are still going to have to bear the burden of the great harm that they've put into the world. I think they've got a very great shock coming when payback time occurs, and I wouldn't trade places with them on that day for all the gold in the world.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I agree entirely, but I think it is a flawed system. But I think, when I say that God and Satan is essentially the same dude, or part and parcel of the same force, the destructive force and the creative force in the same sort of understanding. I think part of that is because ultimately they say Satan is the god of this world, but he's not the god of creation. But perhaps, let's say Satan, the notion of Satan was written into the dynamics of the matrix. Let's go at the matrix. And Satan is there for what? He's there to lead us into temptation. He's there to possess our soul. And how does he do it? He does it by deceit. And why does he do it? He does it because he wants to be loved. And I could almost say that then we look at the people that we idolize in this world, the sycophants, the genocidal maniacs, the people who want to take away the very essence of humanity out of our lives. These are the people that we worship, idolize, follow, obey, and allow to dictate to us. These people are satanic in their mindsets because they don't have service to others. They have service to themselves and their own little sick, twisted fantasies. And you could say that's whether it's government leaders, members of royalty, people in important positions, or pop stars, celebrities. We know for a fact that many of them are all engaged in satanic rituals with a Luciferian mindset, yet still we idolize them. This is why we as a species, if you like, really need to get on top of where we align our spiritual values, who they align to and why. Because I mean, you mentioned the word gold there. I mean, in alchemy, there's something known as the transmutation of metals from lead into gold. Not many people realize that alchemy is really a metaphor for the development of the human mind from base consciousness, which is represented by the substance called lead because it's dense, but it's malleable, to the attainment of spiritual enlightenment, which is represented by gold. And gold is precious and everlasting. That's what transmutation is in alchemy. It's the metaphor of developing the mind. When we realize we can, as a species, collectively attain enlightenment, reach the higher orders of mindset, open our third eye, we can see beyond. We can understand that the metaphors and the philosophy into this kind of religious thinking that we need to get ingrained into our heads to step outside of the systems that are dragging us down by a force that's represented by, the dude called Satan.
So in a world of duality, there has to be evil or the potential for evil in order for good to even exist. I think you were sort of alluding to this in one of your previous comments. That's how we learn our soul lessons. So could we ever have a utopian scenario on Earth where only good exists? Or does the presence of evil actually do us a favor, spiritually speaking? So if we only had good and everything was wonderful and beautiful, would we evolve and learn things? Or, do we need evil?
I think evil is just a bit like the dark occult for me. The dark occult is what give me a greater appreciation into almost the highway out of hell. Do you know what? I'm gonna refer back to a song, which again I used this on my presentation recently, using Led Zeppelin, and I know you've done various topics using Led Zeppelin as examples.
Yeah, well, Stairway to Heaven got endlessly analysed on Saturday, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, but again, I'm just going to use a word out of their song. And in fact, I think I used two words out of their song on Saturday, which I said, when you look to the west is one of the lines in Stairway to Heaven, because when you look to the west, well, that's where the sun dies. So the sun dies because that's the dark path. It's a bit like the left-hand path. Heading west is where the sun dies. It's all a metaphor. It's an allegory. It's it's the darkness. But Led Zeppelin in their song "Stairway to Heaven" used the well-known phrase, "Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on." And do you know what? I'd almost say that we are reaching the end of a period of darkness, an evil age. And it's kind of quite weird how it all kind of runs parallel with the start of the age of Aquarius and almost like a new timeline, which was, even in astrological terms, there was the convergence of Saturn and Jupiter, the two giant planets, one associated with the benefic planet and the malefic planet, the good and evil, on the emergence of the age of Aquarius. I think the world is set to change, and it's set to change out of an evil age and into a golden age. And a lot of religious and spiritual texts and books will talk about this period. But in order to emerge into a golden age, we need to come literally out of the depth of a dark cave. And again, this kind of runs parallel with this vision. We were once in a dark cave, and when we see the light, and if we can work cooperatively as a species, as a society, to help each other to get there, then we're going to emerge into that golden age. So yes, I think it is very, very possible. Do we need evil in our life? No, we don't, but it's helpful to help us understand where we could be doing differently. But once we've tasted it, once we've seen it, I think we are more than capable as a species to eradicate it as best as.
So it's long struck me that if we could somehow find a way of making it kind of cool and fashionable to be into the uncovering of occult knowledge and breaking through the lies and the deception of the mainstream, we'd really be getting somewhere. This is something I wove into the narrative of my novel, The Cause and the Cure, which I published at the end of 2019. And people have asked, well, what did you know? Putting out a book called The Cause and the Cure just a couple of months before the bloody scandemic kicked in. And I'm looking forward to doing a sequel to this novel as the next book that I'll write. My head is full of ideas for that. But in The Cause and the Cure, I had these characters, Keith and Phil, and they're young men and they're mates, and they're into researching conspiracy and truth as their main pastime. And this was set in the early 90s when that was a very rare thing. You couldn't just dive onto the internet and uncover stuff like we can now. But if only we could somehow make it cool for young people to be into uncovering truth. young people seek the approval of their peers, don't they? So if it could be cool to question the lies of the mainstream media and not believe a goddamn thing that the government tells you. So, you know, anyone that does swallow what the BBC Evening News has said just gets derided in the schoolyard or whatever, but by their peers saying, you don't really believe what the government's telling you about this climate change bollocks, do you? Seriously? They're kind of shamed in that way. That we'd really be getting somewhere if we could achieve that.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I don't know what the answer is to that. I mean, I since I was a young boy have been searching for the almost like the what is the nature of reality? What is reality about? And I remember as a young child, one thing I used to do when I was very young was I used to quickly look into mirrors or quickly look into a reflection of a shop window or car window to see if I could catch out reality, because I was convinced there was something different about it. I mean, that curiosity for me, in a sense, has been satisfied because there is something very, very unique about reality. Not just unique, it's divine. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not really interested in what scientists have got to say. As far as I'm concerned, most scientists are ignorant. They might be much more clever than me. They'll much more qualifications than me. Like I say, I've got a very humble existence. But the closer you look into the detail of reality, you uncover meaningful synchronicities, symbology, and meaningful connections that are all embedded, and tie them in with almost like a philosophical principle and knowledge and understanding of ancient scriptures and mythologies, then we can't fail to deny that there's something divine and purposeful into the design of our creation. This is what the occult tries to hide from us. They try to hide the fact that there is a divine nature to reality. And how do they do it? They rely upon people's ignorance. It's as simple as that. Ignorance, fear, and cowardice just so happens to be the same three factors that govern that are eradicated, if you like, in the process of Freemasonry, the 3 degrees of Freemasonry, all about eradication of what you class as the egoic defects. But you're asking, what can we do for the youth of today to make understanding the occult cool? Do you know what? I don't have the answers for that. But do you know what, Mark? I mean, I said I've got a very humble background. Most of my life, I've been a soldier. The word soldier, you could say, well, what is a soldier? A soldier will go off and murder other people at the bequest of who? The Satanists in charge of them. You know, the government, the royalty. These are Satanists. They've got a satanic mindset with a Luciferian discipline behind their backgrounds. And they'll get people like myself and my friends to go and murder each other and potentially get killed because we are soul dead. That's what a soldier is. So I would appeal to
soul dyers.
Soul dyers, yeah. We have sold out. We do not possess a soul, because if you had a soul, if you had an inclination of what that word meant, you wouldn't go out trying to claim the soul of another man. That needs to stop, and that needs to stop now. And people in the military, people who I've worked with, people who I call my friends, need to really start waking up, get rid of this ignorance, get rid of these ego defects that are driving them into this. So what I was going to say is I've been a soldier most of my life. I've worked with special forces. I've spent most of my career in special forces. Essentially, to a lot of people, this is one of the coolest jobs in the planet. For me, yes, an amazing job, but I realize now what's behind it all. You know, if you switch off and you don't care less what the politics are dictating to you, then carry on killing people. Carry on, face the karmatic consequences of your actions. But look a little bit deeper. Bearing in mind, I'm just an average kid. Spent most of my life in the military. I'm not a bright guy at all. You know, there's nothing unique about me. There's plenty of bright guys in the military. Look a little bit deeper, find out the hidden veil of reality that's going on in the world. Trust me, it's amazing when you uncover the connections, the synchromysticism, the hidden meaning, the hidden philosophy behind the nature of our reality. It cannot get any cooler than that for me. Much cooler than, jumping out of an aeroplane with a machine gun. Yeah,
That's right.
it's good fun, but it's not as cool as understanding the nature of reality. So that's what I'd say to the youth of today.
Yeah. And cooler than playing records in clubs and on the radio, which I've done for many years, which is, it's a pretty cool job, but even cooler is gaining knowledge of things that actually affect our lives and our souls and are beneficial to the rest of humanity and creation. And it'd just be great to see more young people at these conference events, because, we had the one that we've been referencing on Saturday, and I would say the age group was sort of 45 upwards. I didn't notice anyone that appeared to be under 40. And this is my experience at most of these events. I do a lot of conferences. And if you had to take an average age from the audience, I'd say the average is probably about 50 or 55. So we need more people in their 20s and 30s coming to these things. And if we could achieve that by making it cool to obtain this knowledge, we'd really be getting somewhere. Just a thought. Yeah,
I agree. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it would be great to see more youngsters, looking deeper. But having said that, I was a young man when I joined the military. Had somebody explain to me about, the hidden nature of reality, the occult order, what Satanism is. When I was in my 20s, I probably wouldn't have been interested either. But in a sense, I would say it's taken me a lifetime really to understand things on a deeper level to the way I do now, but largely because I never had that in my background of education or, within my peer or social networks. I think we need to really appeal to that and try to get this information out there to youngsters and start just spreading the good work as much as we can. And bringing young people into the equation.
Yeah. It seems that every generation in human history has involved a small privileged few that would take on great knowledge and truth and be able to apply that in their lives. It would only have been a very small percentage in previous generations. But in this generation, there's the potential for vast numbers of people to take that on if the will is there. So if we say that 100 years ago, out of the totality of the human population, maybe 1 to 2% might gain profound spiritual knowledge. In 2022, there's the potential for 100%, but certainly there's potential for 50%, way more than ever before. So there have to be profound spiritual implications of such a potential shift. I mean, we would be above 1 to 2% clearly now in terms of those that have woken up to great truth. I'd say we're nowhere near 50%. If I had to put a number on it, I might guess sort of between 15 and 20% possibly. But that's so much more than in any previous generation. So we are on the way to where we need to be.
Yeah, without a doubt. Definitely this. Again, I'm going to go back to this vision I had, Mark, which, it might sound crazy to some. That's fine. I can deal with that. I was there. I saw what I saw, and I kind of know what I know as a result of what I saw. But I saw that we succeed as a human species. We succeed out of this veil of darkness that's descended upon us. But it's our learning process that needs to change. We need to learn what it is that's affecting us and how do we spiritually grow to take our way out of this. But to me, it's really encouraging because for a number of years, I knew nobody who understood the dark occult. Now I see lots and lots of people. I never used to speak in big groups in venues before recent years, but now I have been, and more people I see are now interested in and starting to realize the nature of how this all works, how we've been we've allowed ourselves in a sense to go through this period, but this is a learning period, and when we emerge from it, we will be victorious. This I saw.
All right, so That's a pretty optimistic note on which to wrap things up. Do you have any of your work online that you would like to direct people to?
I've got a BitChute channel, and I'll be quite honest, there's not a great deal on there. The name of my BitChute channel is called Six Blade. That's SIX with a hyphen followed by the word blade, BLADE. I like to think it's like a blade or a knife is like an action term. You know, certainly anybody reads tarot will understand it's an action card. And the number 6, of course, is kind of associated with man's ignorance or with anything kind of satanic, the number 6. So I strike a knife, I strike action into the heart of darkness. That's kind of what I developed from that word alone. But I've got a couple of presentations on there. I talk about the occult natures of the Christmas tradition, and also talk about what I class as the occult virus infecting humanity, which of course is the whole COVID thing. But I've got more and more presentations which I hope to get on there in the near future. I am a complete amateur in presentations, in anything occult. As much as I study it, as much as I find it interesting, this is just something I've done kind of on an evening in between my day job. But hopefully I'm going to get more and more time to put to this, because I see this. I mean, I'm a big follower of not only your work, but Mark Passio's work as well. The one great work. I think this is my little bit, if you like, this is me kind of negating some of my karmic debt as being a soldier for a long time to actually help spread the word of truth and enlightenment out there to other people.
Sure. Well, for as long as we all do what we know we should and what we can, who could ask any more of us? Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it there, brother. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks very much.
This is just vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up